The morning Detroit hit 19 degrees Fahrenheit, a 10-year-old girl in a red coat made a choice that neither she nor anyone watching could have understood at the time. She stood at a bus stop on Gratiot Avenue, backpack, on her shoulders a paperback book pressed against her chest. The coat she wore was the only one she owned, bought for $3 at Goodwill, its third button re-sewn with gold thread because her grandmother had run out of red. Small, quiet, easy to miss. But she saw a boy on the other side of the fence, 11 years old, shaking so hard the cardboard box around him rattled, lips the color of a bruise. She took off the coat, pushed it through the iron railing, said two words, then she got on the bus. 20 years later, that boy walked into her federal courtroom. He was worth $340 million. She was the judge assigned to his case. And when he looked up at the woman sitting behind that bench, he stopped moving. Because on the third button of her black vest sewn in gold thread was the one detail no one else in that room could possibly understand. This is the story of what kindness looks like when it comes back. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. I read every single one. And if you're new here and stories like this are what you've been looking for, hit subscribe. Don't miss what comes next. The radiator in apartment 3C of the East Side Detroit complex on Mack Avenue had been broken since October. It was now January and nobody had come to fix it. Amara Washington was 10 years old and she had learned to sleep in two pairs of socks and her school sweater pulled over her pajamas. The window above her bed had a crack running through the lower left corner. Her grandmother had sealed it with 2 layers of duct tape and a strip of plastic sheeting from the hardware store on Van Dyke. It kept out most of the wind, not all of it. Grandma Ruth was already up. Every morning without exception, she was at the kitchen table by 6 a.m. Coffee made the small radio on low, her Bible open to wherever she had stopped the night before. The kitchen was the warmest room in the apartment because the stove was old and leaked heat even when it was off. Ruth had known this for years and arranged the mornings accordingly. That January Tuesday, Amara came into the kitchen still half asleep, her red coat draped over one arm. The coat was from Goodwill on Gratiot, $3 found on a Saturday in September, when the winter rack had just been put out. A little too big in the shoulders, which Ruth said was fine, because Amara would grow into it. Deep red, almost burgundy in low light, bright as a fire engine in the sun. The third button had come off sometime in November. Amara had saved it in the small dish on the bathroom counter, but when Ruth went to sew it back on, the red thread had run out. She used gold instead. "It'll show," Amara said, watching. "Good," Ruth said, not looking up. "Gold is stronger anyway, baby." That morning at breakfast, Amara was eating oatmeal when she asked the question that had been sitting in her chest for several days without a name. "Grandma, why do you always give things away? We don't have that much either." Ruth set down the dish towel, pulled out the chair across from Amara, and sat with the slowness of someone who wants a child to know they are being taken seriously. "Baby," she said, "a cold body can be warmed by a coat, but a cold heart, only kindness can do that." Amara looked at her oatmeal, then back at her grandmother. She nodded the way children nod when they are filing something away, rather than fully understanding it yet. Ruth watched her and said nothing more. Some things did not need more. Amara put on the coat, picked up her backpack, tucked her book under her arm. To Kill a Mockingbird, borrowed from the school library, the spine soft from other hands, a small orange sticker on the back that said, "Return by January 14th. She was on her third read, 10 years old and already her third read, because the first time she had read it for the story, the second time for Atticus, and this time she was reading it for Scout, for what it felt like to be a child, watching the adult world make decisions that made no sense. She had used a pencil to underline a sentence on page 33, all 3 times pressing harder each read. "You never really understand a person till you climb into their skin and walk around in it." She was 10 years old. She understood that sentence more than she could explain. She left the apartment at 7:08 a.m., 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Her breath became a cloud the moment she stepped through the door. The bus stop for the 53 line was 4 blocks east on Gratiot Avenue near the overpass. She knew the walk by heart, past the barber shop, the empty lot, the liquor store with the metal grate still down the bus shelter, with the left panel missing so the wind came straight through. She stood on the right side. She was the only one waiting at 7:15 a.m. She opened her book. She almost missed him. He was behind the shelter, wedged between the back wall and the chain-link fence inside a cardboard box that had once held a washing machine, broken down and reformed into something like a shell. He was inside it, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around himself, wearing a gray sweatshirt with no hood and jeans far too thin for January. No coat, no gloves, canvas sneakers not insulated. He was 11 years old. Dark hair gone unwashed long enough to lose its shape. Lips the color of a bruise. Eyes closed. But his chest was moving. Slowly. Still breathing. Amara stood very still. She looked at him. Then at her coat. Then back at him. She thought about what her grandmother had said that morning. Not as a reason, not as a command, just as something true that was sitting in the air alongside everything else. She took off the coat, walked to the fence, crouched down, carefully pushed the coat through the gap between the fence post and the shelter wall, and laid it across him. His eyes opened. They looked at each other. His eyes were dark brown and glassy with cold. When he focused on her face, something shifted in them, not surprise exactly, more like a question he did not know how to ask. "I'll pay you back someday." His voice was rough, barely there. "I swear." Amara held his gaze 1 second longer. "Just stay warm," she said. She stood. The bus was coming. She could hear the groan of the 53 line's brakes 2 blocks out. She picked up her backpack, got on, found the last row. She opened her book. She could not read. Her hands were cold and the words would not stay still. Outside, Detroit moved past in its January gray. She stared at the window and held one thought the entire ride to school. "I hope he's okay." Nothing more than that. She had given away the only warm thing she owned, and she sat with her arms wrapped around her backpack and hoped it was enough. She came home that afternoon with a temperature of 101.4 degrees. Grandma Ruth put a hand on her forehead. The moment she walked through the door, said nothing. Just guided her to the couch, pulled the heavy blanket from the closet, brought a glass of water. She did not ask about the coat. She looked at Amara's face and understood something without needing it spoken. She tucked the blanket around the child's shoulders and let her sleep. The following week, Miss Paulson returned the class essays. Amara had written 4 pages on the difference between justice and fairness. Her teacher set the paper face down on her desk, paused and spoke loud enough for the nearest 2 rows to hear Amara. "Did someone help you write this?" "No, ma'am." 3 seconds of eye contact. Then Miss Paulson moved on. No apology, no explanation. The paper had a red A+ at the top. Amara looked at it, tucked it into her folder, and looked out the window. She did not cry. She only remembered. 3 hours after Amara boarded the 53 bus on Gratiot Avenue, a Detroit EMS unit responded to a call near the overpass. They found a boy, 11 years old, core temperature, 94.1 degrees Fahrenheit, borderline hypothermia. Treated at Detroit Receiving Hospital. Released to emergency foster placement 4 days later. The paramedics' intake report noted 1 item under personal effects, 1 red coat, child size, 3rd button, re-sewn with gold thread. A single handwritten note in the margin, subject, found with coat. Likely prevented severe frostbite to both hands. The boy's name was Marcus Cole. He did not know the name of the girl who had left it there. He knew only that she had looked at him and given him the only warm thing she had and said 2 words. He did not forget those words. Not once. Not in 20 years. 20 years is long enough to forget most things. The cold of a particular morning, the number of a bus line, the exact shade of a coat you once owned. Amara Washington had forgotten none of it. She had simply learned to carry it differently, the way you learn to carry anything heavy, over a long time, adjusting the weight across your shoulders until it becomes part of how you stand. Detroit, September 2023. The federal courthouse on Lafayette Boulevard was a building that announced itself without trying. Granite facade. 12 steps up from the sidewalk, 4 columns that had been there since 1934 and would likely outlast everything currently standing on that block. Inside, the floors were marble that had dulled with decades of foot traffic, and the elevators were slow enough that most of the clerks took the stairs. Amara took the stairs. She had been taking them every morning for 3 weeks since the day she was sworn in as a federal judge for the Eastern District of Michigan. 30 years old, the youngest person to hold this position in the court's history, the first black woman. She was aware of both facts in the way you are aware of weather, constantly in the background informing everything without being the thing itself. Her chambers were on the fourth floor northeast corner. The window looked out over the parking structure and past it a thin slice of the Detroit River. On clear days, she could see the Canadian shore. She had put nothing personal on the walls yet. There had not been time, or she had not made time, she was not entirely sure which. The morning her first major case was called, she arrived at 7:45 a.m. The courtroom was already being prepared. The clerk arranging binders, the court reporter setting up her equipment, the bailiff checking the temperature, which had been running cold all week because one of the two HVAC units was broken and the repair order was somewhere in the building management queue. 68 degrees. Amara noted it and said nothing. She had slept in colder rooms than this. She had one ritual before every session. She opened the middle drawer of her desk, took out a small spiral notebook. Dark blue cover edges, worn soft, the spiral bent slightly from years of being opened and closed. She turned to a page she knew by feel. The handwriting was a 13-year-old's, large and careful, each letter formed with the deliberate pressure of someone who wanted it to last. The entry was a single sentence, quoted exactly, "Law school is expensive, honey. Have you thought about something more practical?" Below it in the same hand, but pressed harder into the paper. "Watch me." She looked at it for 10 seconds. Then she closed the notebook, put it back in the drawer, and went to put on her robe. The case on the docket was Coal Technologies Incorporated versus the City of Detroit, $340 million. A contract dispute over a major infrastructure rehabilitation project, water mains, electrical grid upgrades, fiber optic installation across 4 of the city's most underserved zip codes. Coal Technologies had been awarded the contract in 2019, begun work, and then found the city in breach of payment terms 18 months in. The city disputed the breach. The matter had been in preliminary hearings for 2 years before landing on Amara's docket. It was the largest case the Eastern District had seen in over a decade. She had read the full brief twice before the first session. She had questions about Appendix C. Judge Patricia Holloway was not assigned to the case. She was, however, Amara's direct superior in the court's administrative structure, and she had a habit of moving through the fourth-floor hallways with the particular authority of someone who had been there long enough to consider the building partly hers. That morning, Amara heard her voice in the corridor, outside the clerk's office, low, not quite a whisper, clearly not intended to travel. It traveled. They gave a $340 million case to a diversity hire. God help us. The clerk did not respond. Amara, standing at her desk 12 feet from the open doorway, heard every word. She picked up her pen, set it down, picked up the case file instead and opened it to page 1. She walked into the courtroom at 9 a.m. and took her seat. Thomas Reed entered 2 minutes later. 54 years old, silver-haired, moving through the room as if he had reserved it in advance. His suit was dark navy, almost black, in the courtroom lighting, well-cut, expensive, without being loud. His watch caught the light when he set his briefcase on the table. He looked at Amara, the way some men look at a door they expect to open without resistance, briefly, with mild assessment, already moving on. He leaned toward his associate and said something. The associate looked down at her notepad. Amara had heard similar things said at similar volumes in similar rooms before. She let it pass through without stopping. Reed straightened, addressed the bench directly, his voice carrying the particular polish of a man who had spent 30 years making courtrooms feel like his living room. Your Honor, before we proceed, the plaintiff would like to raise a preliminary matter. Given the complexity and the dollar amount at issue in this case, we believe it would be appropriate to request reassignment to a judge with more extensive experience in commercial contract litigation. No disrespect intended. The room was quiet. 11 people watching. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keys. Amara looked at Reed. She let 2 full seconds pass, not from hesitation, but because she had learned that silence in a courtroom used correctly was a tool as precise as anything in the rules of evidence. Motion denied, Mr. Reed, she said. Shall we proceed? Reed smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind that said he had other methods and was in no hurry to deploy them. He opened his binder. The session ran 3 hours. Reed was meticulous, well-prepared, and consistently addressed his arguments to a point roughly 6 inches above Amara's head. She noted this without expression and asked her questions about Appendix C with the same flat precision she brought to everything else. Reed answered at length. His answers were technically responsive and substantively empty. She wrote 3 words in her notepad, "Come back to this." At 4:17 p.m., 47 minutes after the session concluded, a video clip appeared on Twitter. Reed was standing on the courthouse steps, 4 microphones in front of him, speaking with the ease of a man who considered press availability a professional obligation. "I've argued before Supreme Court justices," he said, "Court of Appeals benches, federal districts across this country. I have enormous respect for the institution. But I'll be honest, walking into that courtroom today felt like walking into a law school moot court." By 9 p.m., the clip had 2.3 million views. The hashtag Detroit Court was trending in Michigan and moving nationally. Amara watched it once alone in her chambers, the desk lamp the only light in the room. The building had mostly emptied. Outside the parking structure, lights had come on against the early dark. She watched it once, closed her laptop, did not watch it again. She pulled the case file toward her and opened it to Appendix C. The representative for Cole Technologies had not attended in person that day. According to the scheduling note filed by Reed's office, the CEO would attend all subsequent sessions personally. The name on file was Marcus Cole, founder and chief executive officer. Amara read the name, made a note, moved on to the next page. She did not know yet. She had no reason to know. It was simply a name in a file, the same as any other. She stayed in her chambers until 11 p.m. reading. Reed filed the supplemental evidence package at 8:57 p.m. The deadline was at 9 p.m. His office had known the deadline for 11 days. The package contained 340 pages exhibits, depositions, financial records, correspondence chains, 2 expert declarations, and a set of appendices that included Appendix C in its expanded form. All of it arrived in Amara's electronic filing queue with 3 minutes to spare. She was still in her chambers when the notification came through. She looked at the timestamp, then at the page count. Then she made a fresh pot of coffee in the small machine on the credenza, pulled her chair closer to the desk, and began to read. By midnight, she was on page 90. By 1:30 a.m., she was on page 180, and the first coffee had been replaced by a second. The highlight pen she had started with ran dry somewhere around page 200. She switched to pencil, pressing harder than necessary, the way she always did when something required concentration she had to fight for. Page 280. Then Appendix C, expanded version, subsection 4. A chain of internal emails the sender addresses, partially redacted. Dates running February through April 2019. The content discussed consulting arrangements, third-party advisory fees, and a payment structure that referenced a separate entity by a name that appeared only twice in the entire document, Meridian Advisory Group. Amara stopped. She read the 2 references again. Then she looked at the timeline of the main contract awarded June 2019, preliminary negotiations beginning March 2019. She wrote the name Meridian Advisory Group at the top of a blank notepad page, drew a line, wrote the dates, looked at the gap. Something did not fit. She could not yet say what exactly, but something did not fit. She wrote beneath the dates, "Come back to this." The clock read 2:47 a.m. She closed the file, turned off the desk lamp, and drove home in the dark. She slept 4 hours. The second session opened at 9 a.m. Reed arrived with the same measured confidence, arranged his materials with the efficiency of a man who treated preparation as a form of dominance. 2 associates this time instead of 1. Amara waited until the preliminary record was established, then asked her question about Appendix C. Reed answered for 7 minutes. The answer was detailed, technically grounded, and moved in careful circles around the specific point she had raised without ever landing on it. When he finished, the associate to his left was already flipping to the next tab section. Amara wrote 2 words in her notepad, did not press the point, did not signal that she had noticed the circles. She simply wrote Meridian Advisory Group, underlined it once, moved on. After the session, Judge Holloway was waiting in the corridor outside Amara's chambers, standing in the open doorway, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who had decided to have a conversation they would rather not be having. "Close the door," Holloway said. Amara closed it. "This case is drawing attention. It doesn't need," Holloway said. "Reed has been in this building longer than most of the furniture. He has relationships with people who have relationships with people. You understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand what you're telling me. The cleanest outcome is a negotiated settlement. Both parties walk away, the city avoids a public judgment, and this courtroom stops being a trending topic." Amara looked at her. "With respect, Your Honor, isn't arriving at the truth exactly what this courtroom is for?" Holloway held her gaze for a long moment. Something moved across her face that was not quite anger and not quite respect, something in between, still deciding. She uncrossed her arms, opened the door, left without another word. Amara stood in the middle of her chambers for a moment after the door closed. Then she sat down, opened her notepad to the Meridian page, and stared at it. That evening, she called Devin from the parking structure before she got in her car. They talked about small things first, their cousin's apartment in Ferndale, whether the Tigers had any hope for next season, a neighbor dispute that had escalated to involve the city's noise ordinance. Devin had a gift for making ordinary things sound worth discussing, and Amara let herself be carried by it for a few minutes. Then she went quiet. "Dev," she said, "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." The line was silent for a moment. "You remember that morning on Gresham," Devin said, "with the coat. Dev, you took off the only warm thing you owned and gave it to a kid you didn't know in 19-degree weather, and then you got on the bus and went to school. You didn't wait to see if he deserved it. You didn't ask for anything back. You just saw someone who needed something, and you gave it because it was right." A pause. "Amara, you've always been strong enough. You just forgot." She sat with that in the quiet of the parking structure engine off-city, muffled outside the glass. "Thanks, Dev," she said. She drove home, stood at her kitchen counter for a while, opened the dark blue notebook, and looked at the page she knew by feel. Watch me. She was in bed by midnight. That for this week was early. The following morning, Marcus Cole walked into the courtroom for the first time. He was 31 years old, and he arrived without announcement, no pause in the doorway, no advance entry by an assistant. He simply came through the door and moved to the defendant's table, and the only thing distinguishing him from anyone else was the way the room registered his presence without him asking it to. He wore a white Oxford shirt, no tie, dark trousers. Nothing about his appearance suggested the 47-story building bearing his company's name, or the infrastructure contracts across 11 cities, or the net worth on 3 magazine covers. He looked like someone who had decided a long time ago he had nothing to prove through clothing. He looked up at the bench. He saw Amara. He stopped moving. 4 seconds. Long enough for his associate to glance up and notice. Long enough for Reed, standing at the plaintiff's table, to look over. 4 seconds in which Marcus Cole stood in a federal courtroom and did not move his eyes on the woman behind the bench, his expression doing something that was not quite recognition and not quite shock, but contained elements of both. Then he sat down. His associate leaned in and said something quietly. Marcus shook his head. A small motion. "I know her," he said, barely audible, not intended to carry. Across the room, Amara called the session to order and opened her file. She had noticed the pause, she noticed everything in her courtroom, but assigned it no particular meaning. People paused when they entered federal court. It happened for many reasons. She did not know. Not yet. But Marcus Cole spent the next 3 hours not looking at the documents in front of him. He was watching the way she read, the way she asked questions, the way she held silence until it became useful. He had been watching for 20 years. He just had not known where to look. It was not an image exactly. More like a sequence of sensations that had never fully left him. The cold, the particular cold of January, concrete against his back, the kind that moves through cardboard and clothing and skin and settles somewhere close to the bone. Then warmth, sudden and unexpected, the weight of fabric landing across his chest and arms. The smell of laundry soap and something faintly sweet like the inside of a warm kitchen. And then a voice. 2 words, quiet and without ceremony, already moving away. Just stay warm. Marcus Cole had built a company worth $340 million. He had sat across tables from senators, sovereign wealth fund managers, and the kind of people whose names you recognized before you understood why. He had learned in the years since that January morning on Gratiot Avenue to move through rooms with a stillness that other people read as confidence. None of it had touched the memory. It stayed exactly as it was, that weight of warmth across his chest, and those two words, and then the sound of bus brakes and a girl walking away without looking back. During the recess, he followed her into the corridor. Amara was standing near the window at the end of the hall, reviewing a document, her back half turned to the room. The afternoon light came in flat and gray through the courthouse glass. Marcus walked toward her and stopped at a respectful distance, far enough to signal that this was a choice, not an intrusion. She looked up. "Your Honor," he said, "I need to say something that has nothing to do with this case, and then I'll never raise it again if you prefer." Amara looked at him with the particular steadiness she brought to everything. Waiting. "Gratiot Avenue," Marcus said. "January 2003. The bus stop near the overpass eastbound side. There was a girl, maybe 10 years old, who gave her coat to a boy she didn't know through the fence of the transit shelter." The document in Amara's hand did not move, but something in her face changed, a stillness arriving over a stillness that was already there. The way a lake surface changes when the wind stops. "The button on the third buttonhole," Marcus said, "sewn with gold thread." 3 seconds. 4. "Marcus," she said. It was the first time in 20 years he had heard her say his name. He had not known until this moment how much that would cost him. "I had a core temperature of 94 degrees when the paramedics found me 3 hours later," he said. "The report said the coat prevented severe frostbite to both hands. I kept both hands." He paused. "I've been trying to find you for 7 years." Amara was quiet for a long moment. The corridor was not empty. Clerks passed at the far end, a bailiff crossed from one doorway to another, but the space around them had gone still in the way that particular conversations make space go still. "7 years," she said. "I had your first name from a school photograph, Lincoln Elementary, 2002 or 2003. I had the street. I had the coat." He looked at her. It took a long time. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and held out an envelope. Amara looked at it. She did not take it immediately. "Mr. Cole," she said, "whatever happened in 2003 cannot exist inside this courtroom. I need you to be clear on that." "Open it," he said. "Please, just this once. And then we never speak of it in there again." She looked at him for a moment. Then she took the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper, small the size of a note card torn from a spiral notebook. The paper had aged to a pale yellow. The ink had faded, but was still legible. A child's handwriting, large and uneven, each letter formed with the effortful care of someone who meant what they were writing. "I'll pay you back someday, I swear." Amara read it. She turned it over. On the back was a printed document, a single-page formal letterhead describing an entity called the Red Button Scholarship Fund. Established 7 years prior. Endowment $2 million. Mission to provide full educational scholarships to students from Detroit's most underserved zip codes, with priority given to children experiencing housing instability or involvement with the foster care system. A board of directors, a waiting co-founder line listed as vacant. The logo at the top of the page was a small red circle with a curved line of gold thread running through it. Amara stood with both pieces of paper in her hands for a long time. "I didn't give you that coat to be paid back," she said. "I know." Marcus did not move to take the envelope. "That's exactly why I didn't put your name on it. I named it after what you did because what you did deserves to outlast both of us." Amara looked at the logo, the red circle, the gold thread. She was quiet for a moment that stretched into several moments. Down the hall, a door opened and closed. Somewhere above them, the building settled with a sound like a slow exhale. Then she folded both pieces of paper, carefully returned them to the envelope, and placed it in the inside pocket of her vest, the left side directly over her heart. She did not speak again immediately. Marcus watched her do this without saying anything. "We should go back in," Amara said finally. "Yes." Neither of them moved for exactly one more second. Then Amara turned and walked back toward the courtroom. Marcus followed at the distance, appropriate to the situation. At the plaintiff's table, Thomas Reed was reviewing documents with one of his associates. But as Amara passed through the door ahead of Marcus, Reed looked up. His eyes moved between the two of them. He noted the envelope-shaped outline against the left breast of Amara's vest. He noted the 2 seconds of shared silence before either of them sat down. The patient smile returned to his face, different from before, more considered. He turned back to his documents and made a note in the margin of a page near the back of his binder. That evening at 11 p.m., Marcus Cole called his lead internal counsel, not Thomas Reed, but the attorney who had been with Cole Technologies since the beginning, who had advised against bringing Reed's firm in the first place. "I've been reading the Appendix C materials," Marcus said. "All of them, including the parts Reed's team flagged as non-essential. And was Pull Meridian Advisory Group. Everything we have, I want to know by morning. Chum." His counsel was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, if there's something in there." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I want to know by morning." He was not doing this for Amara. He was doing it because he had looked at the Appendix C materials himself with his own eyes, and what he had found there did not sit right. He had built his company on infrastructure. He knew what contracts were supposed to look like, and he knew what they looked like when someone had adjusted the architecture to serve a purpose other than the stated one. He wanted to know what he was standing in the middle of. By 8 a.m. the following day, Marcus Cole had terminated his engagement with Reed and Associates and retained new counsel. He filed the substitution of attorney paperwork with the court clerk at 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the session was scheduled to begin. Thomas Reed received the notification at 8:51 a.m. He read it twice, set his phone face down on the table, looked at the wall for a moment. Then he picked up his briefcase and walked into the courtroom. The motion to disqualify arrived in the court's filing system at 6:14 a.m. 47 pages. Reed had been working through the night. The argument was constructed carefully that Judge Washington had engaged in an undisclosed ex parte communication with the defendant's principal, that this communication involved a pre-existing personal relationship of unknown duration, and that the integrity of the proceedings required either full disclosure or immediate recusal. The language was precise and clinical. The way a scalpel is precise, it causes damage without appearing to mean anything personal. By 8:15 a.m. CNN had a chyron running federal judge faces disqualification motion in $340 million Detroit case. 3 news vans were parked outside. Amara read the filing at her desk. All 47 pages. She set it down, opened the middle drawer, took out the dark blue notebook, turned to the page she knew by feel. "Watch me." She closed the notebook, put it back. Then she picked up the phone and called for an emergency hearing. The courtroom filled faster than at any point in the preceding weeks. 80 people, lawyers, clerks, reporters, members of the public, who had read the morning news and found a reason to be downtown. Camera operators stood along the back wall. Judge Holloway sat in the second row of the gallery, not presiding, watching. She had come on her own without announcement, hands folded in her lap, expression giving nothing away. Amara took her seat. The room went quiet. She laid out every fact in the order it occurred. January 2003, Gratiot Avenue, the temperature, the coat, the 2 words exchanged through a fence, 20 years of no contact, the corridor conversation during recess date time, content word for word, the envelope, the scholarship fund. All of it entered into the record completely and without omission. If the court determines that this history creates a disqualifying conflict of interest, she said, "I will recuse without objection and without delay. But the record will show exactly what occurred when it occurred, and why, because this court does not belong to anyone's strategy. It belongs to the truth." The room was silent. Reed stood. "The plaintiff renews its demand for immediate recusal, Your Honor." Cole Technologies' new counsel rose. "The defendant does not request recusal. Cole Technologies has full confidence in this court's judgment." Motion to disqualify denied. Reed sat down slowly with the controlled movement of a man recalibrating. In the second row, Holloway unfolded her hands. She looked at Amara for a long moment. Then she looked at the floor. The session continued. It was 2:47 a.m. the following morning when Amara found what she had been looking for. She had been through the city's financial records 3 times, 312 pages of consulting expenditures, cross-referenced against the Appendix C email chain. On the third pass, moving slowly, she reached page 147, a line item entry. Meridian Advisory Group, $4.2 million. Payment dated April 2019, 8 weeks before the infrastructure contract was formally awarded. She opened a second window on her laptop. Delaware Secretary of State Business Entity Search. Public record. No login required. She typed Meridian Advisory Group. Formation date, March 14th, 2019, 6 weeks before the first payment, 10 weeks before the contract award. Registered agent, a virtual office in Wilmington. Members of record 2 names. The first she did not recognize. The second was Daniel Kreis, senior partner Reed and Associates. Amara sat back in her chair. The desk lamp made a small circle of yellow on the documents. Outside the parking structure, lights cast their orange glow across empty spaces below. The clock read 2:47 a.m. The coffee in the 4th cup had gone cold an hour ago. She looked at what she had. All public record. The city expenditure report obtained through standard discovery. The Delaware registration available to anyone with an internet connection. No leak, no source, no warrant. Just a judge who had been careful enough to reach page 147. $4.2 million flowing from city funds to an LLC formed 6 weeks before the contract was awarded, co-founded by a senior partner at the firm, now suing the city for breach of that same contract. She picked up her pen, wrote the sequence in her notepad in the compact handwriting she used when something needed to be permanent. Then she set the pen down, looked at the ceiling. There it is. The following morning, Amara entered the sequence into the open record. She read aloud the formation date of Meridian Advisory Group, the payment amount, the payment date, and the name of the co-founder. She sourced each piece Delaware Secretary of State Public Record City Consulting expenditure report entered into evidence on day 1. She looked at Reed. Mr. Reed Daniel Kreis is listed as co-founder of Meridian Advisory Group, which received $4.2 million in consulting fees from the city of Detroit in April 2019, 6 weeks before this contract was awarded. Mr. Kreis is also a senior partner at your firm. Earlier in these proceedings, you stated you were not familiar with that entity. She set down the page. Would you like to revise that answer? The room was completely still. No movement at the press table. No sound from the gallery. Reed looked at Amara. His expression did not change. But 5 seconds passed before he spoke, and in a courtroom 5 seconds is a very long time. I'd like to request a recess, Your Honor. You have 15 minutes. He returned exactly 15 minutes later. He walked to the plaintiff's table, stood behind his chair, rather than sitting in it, and addressed the bench. Your Honor, the plaintiff's firm has become aware of an internal conflict of interest not previously disclosed to this court. In light of that conflict, we are withdrawing from this matter effective immediately. He picked up his briefcase. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the press table. He walked to the door with the same measured pace he had used every day in this courtroom, head-level stride, even the Patek Philippe still on his wrist. He did not look back. The room was silent for 3 full seconds after the door closed. Then one person in the gallery began to clap. Then another. The sound built until it filled the courtroom, and Amara raised her hand for order after exactly 4 seconds. The same man who told cameras that courtroom felt like a moot court walked out of it without looking back. The cameras were still outside. They recorded that too. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit opened a preliminary inquiry into Meridian Advisory Group the following week based entirely on the public record entered into the court's official proceedings. No tip, no source. A judge had done her job carefully and the trail was already there. That afternoon, Holloway knocked on Amara's office door. She knocked. First time. Amara said, "Come in." Holloway stood in the doorway, not entering fully. She looked at Amara with an expression that had taken some effort to arrive at. "I said something in the clerk's office on your first day. You heard it." Amara held her gaze, said nothing. "I was wrong about you," Holloway said. 3 seconds of silence. I know, Amara said. A pause. Thank you for saying it. Holloway nodded once, turned, walked back down the hall. Amara watched the empty doorway for a moment. Then she turned back to her desk and opened the file to the section marked Final Judgment. The judgment was read on a Thursday morning in late October. The courtroom was at capacity, 80 seats filled camera operators along the back wall, the same held-breath silence the room had learned to hold over the preceding weeks. Outside, 41 degrees. The trees along Lafayette Boulevard had gone to their late fall colors, the last of them holding on. Amara came out from chambers at exactly 9 a.m. She read the judgment in full without abbreviation. Cole Technologies Incorporated versus the City of Detroit. Judgment for the plaintiff. The infrastructure contract of June 2019 was found valid and enforceable. The city had been in breach of payment obligations beginning in the 14th month. Cole Technologies was entitled to the contracted sum plus litigation costs, $340 million. She set down one page and picked up the next. The court further orders, as a binding condition of contract execution, that Cole Technologies allocate no less than 18% of total labor hours to residents of Detroit zip codes 48205, 48213, and 48224. These are communities carrying unemployment rates above 22%. They built the infrastructure this city relies on, and they have absorbed the cost of its deterioration. This is not charity. This is what equitable development looks like. 2 seconds of silence. Then the gallery stirred the kind of sound that starts in one place and finds the rest of the room before anyone decides to make it. Marcus sat at the defendant's table with his hands flat on the surface. His eyes were red. He was not hiding it. When the room cleared, he approached the bench. "You didn't just rule on a contract," he said. "You just changed how the city gets rebuilt." Amara looked up from gathering her documents. "You didn't just bring $2 million to a scholarship fund. You gave 200 kids a different future." The overhead lights caught the gold thread on the third button of her vest, a small curved line catching the light differently from everything around it. "You kept it," Marcus said. "My grandmother re-sewed it the night before the hearing. She didn't know the story. She just saw a loose button." A pause. "She sounds like someone I'd like to meet." "She'd feed you," Amara said. "That's what she does." For the first time in the entirety of the proceedings, they both smiled at the same moment. A small thing, but small things, as both of them had reason to know, were sometimes the ones that lasted. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning in March, Lincoln High School on the east side of Detroit smelled like fresh paint. The gymnasium had been repainted the previous week. 200 folding chairs in 10 rows. The paint smell had not fully gone, and the chairs made a soft scrape on the refinished floor as people sat down. Grandma Ruth sat in the front row, center seat. 82 years old, navy dress, sitting with the straightness of someone who had decided to be fully present, hands folded over her purse. Devin sat to her left, hands on his knees, looking toward the stage. He had arrived 30 minutes early, which was unusual enough that Amara had noticed. Marcus stood at the back near the door. He had not taken a seat. From where he stood, he could see the full room. When Amara walked to the podium, she looked at the 200 young faces, then at the front row. Devin with his hands on his knees, Ruth with her hands folded, both of them looking up. She had written notes. She did not use them. "My grandmother used to say something to me when I was young," she began. "The first time I remember hearing it, I was 10 years old at the kitchen table on Mack Avenue. I had asked her why she always gave things away when we didn't have much ourselves." The gymnasium was quiet. "She looked at me and she said, 'Baby, a cold body can be warmed by a coat, but a cold heart, only kindness can do that.'" In the front row, Devin bowed his head. Ruth did not move. She sat exactly as before, but her eyes were bright. "I didn't fully understand those words then. I have spent 20 years learning what they mean." Amara looked out at the 200 faces. Every single person receiving a scholarship today is proof that she was right. Kindness does not require certainty. It does not require knowing what the person in front of you will do with it. It just requires that you do it anyway. At the back of the room, Marcus looked at the floor, then back up. When the ceremony reached Maya Turner, a girl in the fourth row stood. 10 years old, small, wearing a red coat polyester cuffs worn thin, the third button replaced with a yellow ribbon tied through the buttonhole because the button had been lost. She walked to the stage with the deliberateness of a child who knows she is being watched and has decided to meet that fact. Amara stepped down from the podium and crouched to the girl's level. She unclipped the small pin from her lapel, a red circle gold thread running through it, and pinned it to Maya's coat. "This is yours now." Maya looked down at the pin, then up. "What does it mean?" "It means someone believed in you before you knew you were worth believing in." Maya considered this with the seriousness of a child receiving a fact. Then she nodded the way people nod when they are filing something away to understand more fully later. Amara recognized the nod. She had given it herself at a kitchen table 20 years ago. 1 year later, January 2025, 22 years from the morning on Gresham Avenue, Amara Washington was nominated to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Youngest ever appointed. First black woman. The Detroit Free Press headline, "The Judge Who Gave Her Coat." The New York Times reprinted it. NPR aired a 15-minute piece that stayed in the top 10 most shared stories for 3 weeks. A letter arrived at her chambers 3 days later, hand addressed slightly wrinkled from a backpack. A fourth grader's handwriting, one word misspelled, "Dear Judge Washington. My name is Maya. I keep the pin on my backpack every day. My teacher asked what it means. I told her it means someone believed in me. She cried. I want to be a Jew like you." Maya, age 10. Amara read it, set it down, placed both hands flat on the desk, and pressed her fingers into the wood. Then she walked to the window. 41 degrees outside. The Detroit River flat and gray in the January light. The parking structure. The thin slice of water. The Canadian shore just visible. She stood without her coat, cold air against her arms, the city in front of her, the way she had stood at a bus stop 22 years ago, with nothing between her and winter, except a decision she had already made. "I didn't know that morning that I was choosing the rest of my life," she said. "I just knew he was cold." She turned back. On the desk, the framed square of yellowed paper. "I'll pay you back someday." "I swear." M. Maya's letter still open. A photograph of Grandma Ruth at 60 mid-laugh, needle and thread in her hand. "You were right, Grandma," Amara said. "A cold body can be warmed by a coat, but a cold heart, only kindness can do that. You were right about everything." She sat down, opened the next file. The work was still there. It was always still there. 20 years later, Maya Clark was sworn in as the youngest federal judge in Michigan history. She kept a red pin on her robe the day she took the oath. Her daughter's name was Ruth. There are stories that end when the gavel comes down. This one doesn't. It keeps going through a scholarship ceremony in a gymnasium that smells like fresh paint, through a letter written by a 10-year-old with one word misspelled, through a daughter named Ruth, who will grow up carrying a name she doesn't yet understand. What stays with you after a story like this one? Maybe it's Amara at 10 years old, standing at a bus stop in 19-degree weather, making a decision no one asked her to make, and no one would have blamed her for not making. She didn't have enough. She gave anyway. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. Or maybe it's Grandma Ruth in the kitchen at 11:30 at night, threading a needle with gold because the red had run out. Not because she knew what was at stake, because she saw something that needed doing, and she did it. That is what kindness looks like when it isn't performing for anyone. Or maybe it's the note. 11-year-old handwriting on yellowed paper, "I'll pay you back someday. I swear." Kept for 20 years. Found again in a courthouse hallway. Proof that the things we say when we mean them, even when we are cold and frightened and have nothing, those things survive. Here is what this story asks of you. Not something enormous. Not waiting until you have enough or the moment is perfect. Just to notice the person in front of you. To give what you have, even when it costs you something. Amara didn't know what it would become. She got on the bus, went to school, came home with a fever, and didn't tell anyone. She just thought, "I hope he's okay." That thought became 200 scholarships, became a clause that will put people to work in zip codes that have been waiting for decades. Became Maya, became Ruth. You already have something someone else needs. You may not know what it is yet. So here's the question this story leaves with you. Who is waiting at your fence right now? Tell us in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, what time it is, where you are, and which moment hit you hardest. Was it Ruth with her gold thread? Was it Maya's letter with the misspelled word? Was it Amar at the window coat off 41 degrees? We read every comment. Everyone. If you're new here, this is what we do. Stories that stay with you. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who has been giving and wondering if it matters, send this to them. Tell them the gold thread holds.
And that's where the story ends, but karma never sleep. If that story hit the different, smash the like button and subscribe to the Black Karma story. We drop new story every week about justice, betrayal, and karma hitting by heart. And don't forget, ring the notification bell so you always first in line. Now, tell me in the comment, what would you have done in their shoe? I read every single reply. And now, see you in the next one. On Black Karma Stories, karma always wins.